Well, you never know when you send something to an artist whether they, in fact, ever read it. That it goes into a void. And I didn't know David, but I'd seen his work, and it became a sort of fixation in my head. Because there were things, parallel things happening, oddly, or seemed to me, appeared to me in my observation or just thoughts about him that would parallel thoughts, not necessarily to the story, but to what I'd been thinking about the story and the attitudes in the story. It seemed to parallel the kind of work that David was doing at the time.
To remember the kind of September when life was slow.
David Bowie was perfectly cast as the stranded alien in the adaptation of Walter Tebbis's novel The Man Who Fell to Earth. Former cameraman Nicolas Roeg brought his distinctive visual style to the film.
And rain so yellow. Try to remember the kind of September when you were young and a callow fellow. Try to remember, and if you remember, then follow, follow.
This is some kind of space vehicle, right? What for? Solar probe?
I want you to think beyond that. I want to show you this because I value your contribution to my world.
I'm not certain what that's to be.
Fuel conservation, Dr. Bryce. May be the key to our project.
The film's clever intermingling of past and present, as the lonely alien remembers home and family, creates a hypnotic atmosphere.
The glass is covered. The tank is red. The cameras are colorful. The fan is brilliant. It has to be.
We do it for you. Free camera with each 12-pack.
Sometimes you scratch surfaces too much that people don't want to be touched in that way. They reject that idea or they don't see it. And I would think, oh, they'll love it. That's something they haven't seen. It hasn't been touched on. That's a literature is different because you take it personally to yourself and have a look at it. With a movie, they're all seeing one person's vision.
had enough, don't you?
Well, one of the exciting things about this from the beginning was the fact of David's great popularity in the music world and as an icon all over the world. And so the fact that he was going to do the music meant that he was going to have to do it while the shoot was on.
Would be changing roles. He would then be part of, Mr. Newton wasn't a composer and he wasn't a filmmaker, and he was Mr. Newton.
The original deal we made with David and Bobby Lippman, who became David's agent, is RCA, which was to do the soundtrack, would pay for it. I think it was $250,000, and that would be David's fee. A pittance sounds like a lot of money, but it's a pittance compared to what salaries are now, what fees are now, and also what he made as a rock star.
$300 million?
Not more.
More?
I need more.
Michael Dealey, as I was told it, he tried to renegotiate with David, and David said, "Up yours." When I finally heard the soundtrack, I thought it was remarkable. David is one of those Renaissance people. He can do anything, as he's shown. Well, as you know, the soundtrack is now the album that David did called Low.
In the first rough cut, I temp scored the movie entirely with Pink Floyd music, mostly with Dark Side of the Moon music. Now, you have to remember that this had only recently come out at that point, so it was relatively new. It worked brilliantly. I mean, I thought, for me anyway, I thought it was just, it complemented the picture enormously and gave it this enormous time spread to me. It felt like an eternity because of the style of the Pink Floyd music. Not surprisingly, at that time, and probably now, it was horrendously expensive to buy. In the end, it was John Phillips who actually put the music together, which came from a lot of different sources.
John had a tremendous knowledge of esoteric type country and western and things that. And so it was that we constructed it from that, and he was an extraordinary musician, John.
Where exactly do you come from?
Well, I'm not an astronomer, but somewhere down there.
Are you the first?
The first what? Visitor? I've always been visited.
I presumed, I don't know why, probably because I was arrogant enough to think it so, therefore I acted upon it, that I had been asked to write the music for this film. And I spent 2 or 3 months putting bits and pieces of material together. I had no idea that nobody had asked me to write the music for this film. In fact, it had been an idea that was bandied about. And I constructed a thing which in the death never became the soundtrack to the movie, but became the album Low. Some of it went on to Station to Station, but another chunk of it went on to Low, which was the album that I did with Brian Eno in Berlin a few years later. The only thing I can add to that is that I'd known only the involvement that Nick had had in performance with Jagger before, so I went through the previous films, and I was very, very impressed with Nick's work, overwhelmed in fact. I thought it was, Walkabout in particular, really struck home. I thought it was a wonderful film. But what I didn't tell him that day when he turned up is that I hadn't actually read Man of Fell to Earth. And it was a combination of having seen Walkabout and actually meeting Nick in person that convinced me that this is something I should definitely get involved with. But it was probably the best decision based on absolutely nothing other than a man's previous work that I've probably ever made. It's a wonderful experience. I'm very, very proud of that film. I think that probably one of the things that Nick identified with me is that I was definitely living in 2 separate worlds at the same time. My state of mind was quite fractured and fragmented. But I didn't really have much emotive force going for me, so it was quite easy for me not to relate too well with those around me.
David, I watched him and it struck me that he was always different. He was not an artist that got into a mold. He seemed to be always changing. And that attracted me, that he seemed to have that wonderful chameleon change and make use of his life and grow from it in terms of his work, you know. And I don't think you can put him in a box like a folk singer or a rock and roller. He is expanding and changing all the time. That couldn't be pinpointed.
I think possibly if I do generate the feeling of Newton successfully, it's because of the deconstruction that Nick was able to perform on the basic material that I brought to the role. I was quite plastic in that way, you know. It was virtually easy for Nick to guide me into any area that he wanted to, like the good alchemist that he is. And I think there's a shadow of the life that I was living there, but it was merely a shadow. But I guess in reality, the reality is on the screen. The shadow was in the real life.
We are all aliens. The idea of an alien having to be from... We haven't finished with the aliens on the Earth yet. I mean, the aliens from outer space are yet to come. This is a science fiction film with not a lot of science fiction tools in it. But let's say, without quoting other films, there are many science fiction films that have a certain familiarity, so you're happy with it. You want the spaceship, the alien with a big head. We were trying to make it disquieting and an alien sense of film. What we were trying to aim at was that sense of even the familiar is strange. Even the familiar is strange, looked at in a different way, thought about in a different way. That somehow there's a certain destiny, fate, prescience, a certain inevitability about their coming together. I think that happens in life too, that we have some sort of sets, we have our own self-will, but there's something mixed in with predestination. It isn't as linear as we think it is. I guess that's what perhaps could be differently described as predestination if we don't think of it as an entirely linear affair from back to front. Our will is to change it, but it will happen in a different form, but it is all happening at once. Contact, we're always trying to make that contact. I think with cinema we try to do that. I felt that, is there anybody out there? You know, we do it with our work. We express ourselves with our work of who we are, very much. And I think every kind of work, all work, is part of our offer, fortunately, I mean, or in the cinema, and it's more obvious, or in the theatre, or an artist, or a painter, or a writer, it's more directly, but they're only saying, hello, is there anybody out there? If 3 people in the audience say, I know what he meant, you know, this touched me, your emotions have been in contact with that person. You know, that's it's a thrilling thing. I mean, it's when I've given in on points, which you have to at times, you know, because maybe because there are doubts, so everybody has doubts about the truth of themselves. Lots of thoughts come into mind. Am I doing this out of arrogance, or am I doing this out of willfulness, or God knows what? So that when that doubt comes up, and in many, many cases, sometimes, not always, but many cases, I haven't got what I felt across, but damn, I wish I'd done that scene. I haven't been that truthful. But that's what we're doing with our work. I think we're trying to make contact, knowing somewhere behind it that you never will finally do it. People from another place are often like aliens, you know, and I liked the idea that a person in another society, you know, that's something we haven't quite got used to yet either. Even in on our little planet, we're not we are still strangers in a strange land wherever we go, you know, that we bring our needs and desires and that grew out of our particular little community, you know. Still, we're not yet world travelers in the complete sense, let alone space travelers, you know, that in many ways it seems even as far to go before the world is that familiar with itself.